Hello, Wobbly Phil here. In the comments on my previous video about the Hesketh, TagoMago2178 mentioned that back in the late 1970s, with the traditional British motorcycle industry collapsing around our ears, all our patriotic hopes were pinned on Hesketh and Silk. Silk was another motorcycle mark that had invaded my consciousness all those years ago, but there's little in the way of literature to help spin this yarn. But after diving down the Silk rabbit hole, I've pulled all the threads together. So what was Silk? Why did it disappear so quickly? And what the heck did it have to do with squirrels?
The ability to travel fast and far, but with very little effort, is a very valuable ability indeed.
The Silk story starts at the beginning of the last century when an enterprising Yorkshire gentleman called Alfred Scott took out a patent in 1904 for a vertical two-stroke engine, which he then applied to a 450cc motorcycle in a frame he patented 4 years later. This machine came with innovations like water cooling, a kickstart, monoshock suspension, rotary inlet valves, drip feed lubrication, and a petrol tank that lowered the bike's centre of gravity, a bit like my Indian FTR, although the Scott's tank was presumably capable of being brimmed in less than an entire afternoon. The package was marketed as a kind of luxury wheeled horse for Edwardian gentlemen, previous attempts at putting a horse on wheels having been less than totally successful. Suffragettes appear to have taken to them too. Racing success followed and orders poured in during World War I. After the war and a failed attempt at getting into the car business with a three-wheeler called the Scott Sociable, which wouldn't have looked out of place in the wacky races, Scott seems to have developed a nutty obsession with rodents, in particular those of the Sciuridae family. A series of models were produced, the first being the Squirrel, followed by the Super Squirrel, and culminating in the Flying Squirrel. 750cc machines and even 1000cc two-stroke triple were developed before war intervened again. The Flying Squirrel went back on sale after the war, but it was heavy and didn't offer the bang per buck that 50s rockers were after. The company went into liquidation and was bought by a family of Birmingham silversmiths. By the late 1960s, Scott enthusiast George Silk was on the scene, and by 1971 was able to exhibit a prototype 700S at the Racing and Sporting Motorcycle Show in London. Silk was a very different character to Lord Hesketh, not so much a champagne-swilling socialite with a need for speed, more of a diligent engineer who was at home getting his hands dirty and then perhaps going down the pub for a pint afterwards. Here he is, waxing lyrical about gear ratios.
We said, okay, we've got a 4-speed gearbox here, we'll put 2 more gears in, there and there, and that makes us an 8-speed box.
A limited run of hand-built bikes began, but the Birmingham silversmiths, who owned the Scott trademark and the rights to the Scott engine, were not on Mr. Silk's side. In order to get the bike into production, he had to knuckle down and develop a new two-stroke engine from scratch. In 1975, he started manufacturing his Silk 700S, but now history wasn't on his side either. The Japanese manufacturers were quickly abandoning two-stroke engines due to new environment laws, and the mid-70s oil crisis had kicked in, making petrol expensive. The low production run of just 2 bikes a week meant the 700S was expensive too. Some say it was the most expensive motorcycle you could buy at the time, coming in at a cool £1,355 or just over £10,000 at today's prices. That sticker price says something about the motorcycle economics of today, when the most expensive production bike on the market will cost you £44,000. Or it might say something about the future of that particular motorcycle, the Norton V4 SV. All of that was a shame because the 700S put out a reasonable 48 horses for its time and weighed an incredibly nimble 308 pounds, with a number of innovations like a leaner use of two-stroke oil, enclosed final drive chain, and by all accounts an amazing frame by Spondon Engineering of Derbyshire. Apparently the handling was superb and it would top out at over 110 miles an hour. It didn't need a pump to move the coolant around the engine, it relied on some kind of thermodynamic wizardry which a mechanical numpty like myself has absolutely no chance of understanding. That said, it wasn't without its quirks. It only had 4 gears because it was apparently so torquey. Mr. Silk didn't think it needed a 5th, which was becoming the standard number of cogs by then. Even more eccentrically, those 4 gears were fitted upside down, reversing the by then accepted 1 down, 3 or 4 up shift, and consequently causing some disconcerting moments for riders before they got used to it. And the fuel tap was located behind a side panel, meaning you had to remove the panel to switch it to reserve, something even Evel Knievel would have found discombobulating while doing 70 on the Queen's Highway. Silk soldiered on until 1976 before being sold on to another company who persevered for a couple of years, even bringing out a Mark II dubbed the Sabre, which had a number of cosmetic updates. But when they realised they were hanging by a thread and losing £200 on every bike sold, and with rampant inflation not about to make matters any better, they gave up the ghost in December 1979. And that was that. The Silk just vanished in a puff of two-stroke smoke. My stash of late 70s bike magazines makes no mention of the Silk, obsessed as we all were by them with bigger and bigger Japanese 4-strokes. Truth be told, although the 700S looked every bit a front runner in the mid-1970s, with spot-on, even sexy styling, when my teenage self discovered it was based on a decades-old 2-stroke called the Flying Squirrel, with an upside-down gearbox, the overall effect was somewhat deflating. They do occasionally come up at auction. This nice example sold less than a year ago for £11,500, and this one in the classic black and gold sold for just over £15,000. It apparently still needed running in. The Owners Club still seems to be active, and they have a website if you want to find out more. The link is in the description. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing to let YouTube know we're doing something right here at 3 Phils. Thank you.